As thin as glass. London greeted the evening with that thin sheen the rain leaves behind. The silhouettes of people walking along the south bank quivered on the surface of the Thames like a torn strip of film. Mara Ellis stood at the railing facing Blackfriars Bridge. She felt the cold as it walked into her, through the knuckles of her fingers. She didn't look at the envelope in her hand. She already knew it by heart. The sentence inside had been hanging in the same place, in the same breath, for weeks. On your darkest days, a small light from a stranger. You're stronger than you think. It was the kind of courage only an anonymous letter could carry. It had no name, but many witnesses, like footprints, wiper streaks, and the seagulls shivering on the bridge. Mara had mailed the letter that day. The address was Julian Ward's small studio in Shoreditch, on the third floor of an old brick building behind dirty panes. A place slow to turn its lights on against the evening dark. Julian's darkest days had been seeping into the city's walls for a while. The father he'd only just lost, a startup dream falling apart, and that energetic smile that kept quieting at any moment. For years, Mara had lived at the edge of a kind of field of attraction. They took the same tube line, waited in the same cafe lines, looked at the same clouds, and made different wishes. And yet, their conversations amounted to a few coincidences and stunted work phrases. I'll send the deck. Is this the draft in question? Nice headphones. What brand? Their smiles didn't last long. Their eyes quickly fell elsewhere. That night, 3 days had passed since the letter reached Julian. Mara tried not to forget the letter's existence by acting as if it didn't exist, the way a person struggles both to forget and to remember at once. When Julian opened the studio window, the fog walked inside. The radiator rattled like an old man who'd given up on heating water. On his desk, one of the unopened envelopes was now open. Sentences, written in crooked but determined handwriting, the testimony of a stranger. The more he turned the paper over, the less it seemed to lighten under its own weight. On the contrary, it seemed to grow heavier. Julian's dark days were a maze built of loneliness. After his father's death, an investment that never quite began, a project left half-finished, boxes whose unpacking he kept postponing. The letter left a mark, like a chalk line, rubbed on the maze's walls. Turn back here. Thank you, whoever you are, Julian whispered. Then he felt a distinct urge. Who was the letter's owner? A gaze that had quietly stood at the margins of his life. A client? An old acquaintance? Or her? Don't be stupid, he told himself. It's not her. Even so, his mind remembered a shadow falling over Waterloo Station, a silhouette hurrying through Holborn, hands pausing just slightly as the hem of a brown coat brushed a shelf in the bookshop in Angel. There was no name, but there was a feeling, a scent, a breath. He had all of that. Under his last photo on Instagram, Julian wrote, "A letter in the dark, an unexpected light." A few minutes later, notifications quietly multiplied. Friends left hearts. Someone joked, "Secret admirer, huh?" Julian laughed. One edge of his smile was fake. The other edge was genuinely surprised. Mara's breath stopped when that line appeared on her screen. Julian's sentence was like a rope slipping through her fingers. If she tried to grab its end, she would stumble upon her own trace. Secret admirer. The word was heavy, childish, and exposing. But what Mara had quietly grown over the years was more than admiration. It was love, the kind that becomes simple the moment it's said and deepens layer by layer when it isn't. Mara was the sort who lived her life in an orderly way. In her small, high-ceilinged flat in Brixton, she set alarms for her plants. At the office, she separated meeting notes with colored tabs. She noticed the floor's coffee filters had run out before her manager did. Order made Mara invisible, but it didn't tire her out either. That's why she loved secret things. Nothing changed on the surface of order, but deep down, a tectonic plate quietly shifted. That was exactly what she felt when she wrote the letter. A quiet tremor. She read Julian's sentence once more. Then she wrote nothing at all. Anonymity had its ethics. Sometimes a reveal is a selfish relief and a burden for the other. She had wanted to make Julian lighter, at the cost of making her own secret heavier. Days strung themselves together. London woke to one of those rare days when the sun lies. In Shoreditch, the colors of the murals grew saturated. The coffee line at the market bent around the corner. Julian left the studio and walked toward the Columbia Road Flower Market. He had a habit. Even if he didn't buy himself flowers, he'd find the vendor shouting the loudest and listen to that rhythm, like an audible heartbeat. That day, he saw a small note on a stall. If you are looking for the light, be the window. It had been written with a fine pen. Beside it was a small drawing of a seagull. He shoved his hands into his pockets and skimmed his gaze across the faces in the crowd. The letter, the note, the seagull, were they lining up into a single thread? Or was this just a generous invention of meaning by someone in need of it? When he got home, a second envelope was waiting for him in the mailbox. This time, the sentence was barer. Sometimes a person writes because they know they can't speak, and they hide the writing because they know it won't be read. Julian touched the envelope with a smile. Then he sobered. Could he turn this into a game? A sign? A small clue? For both himself and the letter's owner. That evening, he went to an open mic at a small bar cafe called Stories and Stills. It was a habit no one knew about. Some nights, he'd read short pieces and listened to the audience's reactions like a kind of weather. When it was his turn, he read the first sentence of the letter, as if it belonged to someone else. Then, he added a heartfelt thanks. Every city carries people who cling to us invisibly. Sometimes we rest on their shoulders without knowing it. If you're here, whoever you are, I know turning this into a game is risky, but I want to try something. He paused. 2 pairs of eyes in the crowd looked at his face, 3 pairs at his fingers, and 1 at the tips of his shoes. If the person who wrote this letter knows the little bookshop behind the Whitechapel gallery, put a dot in the notebook with the seagull bookmark in the window. Let them know I'm looking for someone. Don't put my name. Just a dot. The crowd greeted this small mystery with a low round of applause. Theatrical, someone said to a friend beside them. When Julian stepped down from the mic, his heart was racing. He was taking a risk, but risk sometimes makes intention more visible. Mara wasn't there that night, but a friend shared the story on her story. While her friend laughed, "Who is this romantic fool?" Mara's eyes snagged on one sentence. Every city carries people who cling to us invisibly. To cling, yes, that was right. Her love had wanted to stick to Julian's life like a sticky note, but had chosen to remain unseen. The next day at lunch, she walked to the bookshop behind the Whitechapel gallery. On a shelf near the window, a bookmark with a seagull. She found the notebook she was looking for. The trembling of her hands wasn't a sharp shame, but a sweet fear. She opened the notebook and left a small dot on the blank pages. After she closed it, she quickly scolded herself. "Why didn't you write a sentence? Why did you begrudge yourself, even 2 letters?" But that dot made a reverberation in her heart. It was enough, at least for now. 2 days later, Julian went to the bookshop. When he saw the small dot on the page, his smile turned into something noticeable, like hope. The presence of the note was stronger than its absence. He had touched someone. He had reached someone. He searched for a way to say thank you, but he wanted to turn the thanks into a password. Leaving the bookshop, he walked to Spitalfields Market and chose a postcard. St. Paul's Dome on a foggy morning. On the back, he wrote, "There's a silence between us as thin as glass. But I know Glass is also a window. He left the postcard at the bookshop and said, "Give this to whoever buys the notebook with the seagull bookmark." The bookseller nodded with a comical smile. Mara picked up the postcard that afternoon. When she read it, she warmed and chilled at once, as thin as glass. Julian's sentence described the crack inside her exactly as it was. If it broke, it would cut. If it held, it would reveal. If this was her love, she had chosen to look through the window. But glass also has a breaking point. As the days moved forward without any visible action, an invisible bond kept growing stronger. In the mornings, as Mara went from Brixton to Bank on the Northern Line, she found herself smiling slightly at the notifications on her phone. At Stories and Stills evenings, Julian started adding little jokes to his lines to coax clues from her. Seagull? Or pigeon? Do you take your coffee black? Or with a drop of milk? The crowd laughed. She both laughed and kept quiet, because the answers weren't the sort to be announced to everyone. Mara kept leaving small marks in the notebook. A tiny branch, a tiny arrow. Not a tiny heart, not that much. She wasn't that generous with herself. All these little games took a sharp turn one evening on the South Bank. Walking with 2 paper coffees in his hand, Julian felt the wind sweep his hair across his face. He saw a seagull pin fastened to the hem of a coat on a woman sitting on a bench. That pin was silent proof that someone carried the symbol outside the space of the game as well, in real life. He didn't stop to stare. He kept walking, but his heart drew a circle around that pin. If he broke the game, would the spell break too? Or did the spell exist in spite of the game? A week later, Sunday morning, the weather was gray, the city gray, hope a gray close to black. To crack the gray a little, Mara was looking at fresh flowers at Borough Market. Her phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but she answered anyway. "Hello. This might sound strange," said the voice on the other end. Deeply familiar, scattering a smile into its words, even as it struggled to gather its sentences. The seagull notebook at Whitechapel and St. Paul's, and anyway, I have to say this. I think I know you. Mara held her breath for a moment. Do you want to know me? Or do you already know me? Julian laughed, a laugh with a trembling inside it. Both! Sometimes a city makes 2 strangers realize they've been brushing past each other for years. You know, when you both look up at the same time on the tube. Okay, enough. My strange quota is full. All right, Mara said. What do you want? To be honest, Julian said, I want to tease, but I won't. I want to drop hints, but this time I'll speak plainly. I've been clinging to a shadow for years, sometimes at Waterloo, sometimes in Holborn, sometimes to someone whose voice I thought I heard without hearing it. If that person is you, I want you to know I've felt something deep from the very beginning. From long ago, Mara set her hand on the flowers. The cold water numbed her fingers. Did you only realize this now? No, Julian said. I always knew. It's just that glass. I didn't have the courage to break it. Mara fell silent. The sentence walked a knife's edge. There are things I haven't been able to confess either. Don't say your name, Julian said suddenly. Not yet. Let's just meet. Let's carry the game from the stage into real life. Tomorrow morning at Waterloo Bridge at sunrise. 2 coffees. No need for the seagull pin. Just be you. Okay, Mara said. The resolve in her voice surprised even her own heart. The end of the game was the game's best part. That night, before Mara fell asleep, she looked in the mirror. She asked herself how a wind could move a person so much. The sentences she'd kept for years would take on a voice the next morning. She was afraid. She was happy. It was like standing at the edge of 2 different cliffs at once. Julian, meanwhile, sat alone in his studio. The street lamp's light slipping in through the window struck the wall like a thin flame. There was a box his father had left on the top shelf. He hadn't opened it for years. That night he opened it. Inside was an old watch that didn't work. On the back, a small sentence engraved, "Time is the sword of courage." It was his father's dry humor. Julian laughed to himself. Then he felt the heaviness beneath his breastbone. In recent months, he'd noticed he got winded climbing stairs quickly. Stress? He'd said. Sleep. But that night, his breath turned into a shallower, more painful shadow in his chest. Bedtime passed. "Tomorrow," he said. "First the bridge." Then the doctor. He picked up his phone and wrote a note. "Waterloo, sunrise, 2 coffees, even if the glass breaks." He set it as the alarm's title. Morning drew a purple line across the Thames. Mara stood in the middle of the bridge. The weather was like a lover, undecided about keeping a promise. The smell of rain left a thin line between her lips. The footsteps of runners passing around her blended with the rhythm of the water. Julian wasn't there. Time moved on. The coffee stand opened. Mara bought 2 coffees. By now, buying 2 coffees had become a habit. The steam on the paper lids lightly fogged her glasses. 8:17 a.m. Julian still wasn't there. Just then an email dropped into her phone. Sender, Julian Ward, scheduled. Subject, if I'm late. Mara's heart balled into a fist. She opened the email. "Hello, I scheduled this email last night. I've learned not to trust clocks. If I'm late to you, know first that I laughed, because being late is a bad makeup for everything I didn't do early for years. Second, don't be afraid. I'm coming. Third, I know this game has to end. I want to tell you what I've known and kept for years. I first saw you at Waterloo, but Holborn's lights were in my mind. I didn't know your name, but I recognized the shadow of your voice. I loved you too from the very beginning, deeply, quietly, without rushing. Maybe I couldn't say it to myself until today. Today, I will. If this email has reached you and I'm not there, either I can't open the door or I'm just about to open it." Mara felt the warmth of the sentences at her fingertips. She smiled. "Come," she said to herself. "Come already." At that moment, her phone buzzed again. This time, the number was a call from St. Thomas's Hospital. "Hello, is this Mara Ellis?" a woman's voice asked. "We see that your phone number was provided for emergency contact." Julian Ward was just brought in by ambulance. The chest pain from last night, the morning's rush. Something had broken inside and then chosen to stay broken rather than mend. Mara ran. The bridge seemed to sway like a wire stretched between 2 cliffs. Hospital corridors can make a person's own heart feel antiseptic. Following directions from the front desk, Mara reached cardiology. A doctor, fixing his face in professional politeness, explained what had happened. Most likely, an acute coronary. "We're intervening. We'll bring you in shortly." A huge silence opened up inside Mara. She was taken behind glass. Behind it, people in blue gowns moved around Julian. The glass had a name and a function, but visually, it yawned like an endless lie. A moment as thin as glass, as sharp as glass. Her phone trembled in her hand. She reopened the email. "I loved you too, from the very beginning, deeply." This sentence was too small to fill the emptiness of years on its own, and yet it was the size of a life. A nurse said, "We'll call you in." 3 words lasted like 10 years. They called her. Julian lay in a white room, accompanied by the sounds of machines. His eyes were closed, but there was a strange calm on his face. Mara leaned over his bed. "I'm here," she said, keeping the words simple. "I broke the glass." Did Julian's eyelashes flutter slightly, or did Mara want to see it? That no one knows. In that moment, the doctor's gazes were purged of emotion. The measurements didn't turn into a single line, but the lines drew very close to each other. "I love him," Mara said in a low voice, "for a long time." I wrote it into negative spaces, small notes, seagull pins. But now I'm writing with my voice. If you can hear me, I'm here." For a moment the machine changed rhythm, then it steadied again. The doctor was gentle but firm. "You should step out now." Mara stepped out. In the corridor, a poster on the wall. "When the heart speaks, listen." A face undecided between laughing and crying. Mara sat on a bench. One of the coffees in her hands was still warm. The one meant to be shared on the bridge. Minutes or years later, the doctor returned. This time there was real sorrow seeping out from behind his professional politeness. "I'm very sorry." There was no need to finish the sentence. Mara heard all of it. It didn't rain on the day of the funeral. Perhaps that was London's kindness. Julian's friends, people from the Stories and Stills bar, co-workers, neighbors. A small crowd shared a silence that wasn't heavy but wouldn't get up from where it sat. The watch his father had left stood in a small box beside the coffin. Time is the sword of courage. The sword had been drawn by time. Courage was everything left behind. Mara didn't give a speech. She had no right. No one knew her place in the story. But she wrote a sentence in her notebook and read it aloud to herself. A life as thin as glass ended with a love as transparent as glass. Then she stopped by Julian's studio. The sound of the key dissolved inside the flat as she opened the door. On the table was an envelope with her name on it. Had Julian written it late at night or toward dawn? The paper inside resumed a film that had been paused before the hospital. "M, I still won't write your name because I never want to write anything in your place. If these lines reach you, it means a sentence will complete something left unfinished. Our game was beautiful, but it wasn't a game. Before you, I was darkness. After you, I could see the edges of my darkness. If one day, while walking along the South Bank, the wind brushes your hair across your face, know this, the wind of this city is on my side. One last clue from me to you. Invisibility is sometimes the gentlest form of being seen. And yes, I knew from the very beginning, it's you." Julian Mara pressed the paper to her chest. Nothing broke inside her. What had broken earlier now seemed to be finding its place. Tears traced a path down her face as quietly as a creaking door. As she left the studio, she looked at the watch on the shelf. It still didn't work. But time seemed to stop for a moment. In that moment, Mara opened her own time with her own sentence. Some loves don't hurt because they go unsaid, but because of where they arrive, the moment they're said. Months passed. London hosted the bartering of the seasons. Mara took her notebook back to the bookshop in Whitechapel. She placed another dot beneath the seagull bookmark. She added a short sentence beside it. If you're looking for the light, be the window. Then one more line. I didn't break the glass. I walked through it. When she drew her hand back from the notebook, her fingertips no longer trembled. Loss had slowly turned into one of life's objects, the kind that keeps changing places on the table but is never forgotten when you leave the house. Mara started returning to work. She arranged her notes with colored tabs again, but one of the tabs now always remained empty for Julian's sentence. Some mornings, she walked to Waterloo Bridge. She no longer bought 2 coffees. She bought one and left one to the river. The coffee made a small ring in the water and disappeared. It was simple enough to quickly refuse to become a ritual, and yet it still warmed her inside. One afternoon, she went up to the open mic at the Stories and Stills bar for the first time. She entrusted her voice not to someone else's sentence, but to her own heart. "We played a game," she said. But it wasn't a game. I wanted to be a small light in someone's darkness. I hid my name for a long time. He hid his too. Then we reached each other, right where we both said, enough. The tragedy of our story wasn't that its end came late. It was that its truth was heard late. That's why I'm here today. If you want to say something to someone, love the glass, but don't fear it. Glass can cut. Yes, but glass is also a window. The crowd was silent at first. Then the applause gathered, breaking delicately in Mara's eyes. In that moment, she did one more thing. She spoke Julian Ward's name to the world, with her lips for the first time. Mara never wrote another letter. She turned her letters into people. She started a project, Anonymous Light. She left small notes for strangers around the city, hid short sentences between library books, stuck thin stickers on park benches. You are not a storm. You are the window after it. The project quickly multiplied on social media. People added their own notes. Some snapped photos of them and moved on. Some put them in their pockets. Some simply smiled, unseen by anyone. In a press interview, when asked, "Why anonymous?" Mara shrugged and smiled. "Because sometimes a name gets in the way of the message. We're only reminding people of the window." That evening, when she returned from the interview, she found a box at her building's entrance. The note on it read, "On behalf of Stories and Stills," from an old friend of Julian's. Inside the box was the old watch, now made to work again. On the back, a new sentence had been engraved. "Time is the sword of courage." The one who carries the sword now is your voice. Mara strapped the watch to her wrist. The watch ticked like a tiny heartbeat. At that moment, the sentence that passed through her no longer belonged to the past or the future. It belonged to the now. Love is sometimes writing when you can't speak, sometimes waiting when you can't write, sometimes running to the door when you can't wait, and sometimes it's simply being the window. One last time, Waterloo Bridge. Evening. The city's lights fell onto the water like a mirror that multiplied it. Mara leaned against the railing. The wind brushed her hair across her face. She took a postcard from her pocket. St. Paul's Dome. On the back, she wrote a sentence. There was a silence thin as glass between us. It turned out to be a window. She didn't leave the postcard to the Thames. She put it back in her pocket. Some sentences are written not to go, but to stay. Mara began to walk. The city's rhythm didn't change between her steps, but she had added a new note into the rhythm, her own voice. She had moved through Julian's sentences and arrived at her own. The emptiness left by the tragedy filled not with the silence of an end, but with the low note of a continuation. And London as thin as glass, as sharp as glass, as full of light as glass, took a little more light from a window that evening.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story.